Hello, we're very happy to have all of you with us today. Welcome to all the participants of the school, and thank you to everyone who is joining us, whether live or through the recording. I'm Lilian. I'm one of the organizers of this school, together with Maria Lídia, Pedro, and João Bernardo. It's a great pleasure for us to collaborate with Adolfo through the Frontiers of Software Engineering podcast, which plays an important role in the Brazilian software engineering community. Before we begin, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Professor Carver for his generosity in accepting our invitation. This school brings together a series of conversations with leading researchers in our field, and we are honored to consider our first two interviews as our honorary keynotes with Professor Carver and Professor Travassos. We are starting today with Professor Carver, who supervised me during a research visit abroad in my PhD, and who conceived the DEARS initiative, which provided the conceptual inspiration for the creation of this school. Professor Carver, thank you again for joining us. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. So my name is Jeff Carver. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Alabama. I do research in software engineering using empirical methods, and also, as relevant to today's discussion, a lot of work in using empirical methods to do research in software engineering and computer science education. So I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Now I'll pass the word to Adolfo, who is more experienced in conducting this kind of talk. And again, Adolfo, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Lilian. I will start asking Professor Jeff the question. So the first question, it's a little bit, there are three questions, so take your time if you need, but for those who are hearing about it for the first time, what's DEARS, D-E-E-R-S? Who is its primary audience, and what's its main purpose?
Yes, so I'll start with just a little bit of a background. So the DEARS, the acronym, stands for Designing Empirical Education Research Studies. And so the main goal of that project has been to help faculty members primarily we did this here in the United States, but to help faculty members who are in roles that here in the United States, we call them teaching track or teaching faculty, might be instructors, different titles at different places, but people who are primarily focused on teaching computer science at the university level, but that want to do some research about their teaching methods or the tools or the processes used in their classrooms to try to understand how they can do a better job of teaching the topics that they're focused on. And so the real focus of this project was to try to help folks in this role doing help them, support them as they do their education research. And part of the reason that we conceived this, so I should back up, so there were two other faculty members that I collaborated with on this. So Dr. Sarah Heckman at the North Carolina State University and Dr. Mark Sheriff, who's at the University of Virginia. So the three of us had worked together on some other things in the past, and we were doing some discussion about education research. Both of them are in more teaching focused roles, and I'm in more of a research focused role. So it was kind of a good match. We all came out of an empirical software engineering background, so we had some overlap there. The three of us were looking around at some of the research and some of the things that we were reading in the computer science education literature, and realized that there was probably a need to help people who wanted to do this kind of research learn these methods, because many of the faculty members that are doing teaching roles, at least here in the US, I mean, primarily they have a PhD in computer science, but a lot of times people in those roles might have done their PhD research on topics that were not related to people. So it could have been algorithms, it could have been programming languages, it could have been networks, things like that really have less to do with studying people. So the three of us, coming out of a software engineering research background where we all studied people, were very familiar with the methods for designing research studies that gather data and try to understand how people do various activities. And so we really came up with this project to try to help people who may have done their dissertation research in areas that were not related to humans, but that now wanted to do research on students in their classrooms or other things related to the people in the education process. And so the focus here was really trying to help make that transition and both teach the people in this community some of these methods, but then also work closely with them, which we'll talk about it a little bit more later, kind of how the process works, but to work a little bit more closely with them to both design and conduct a study in their classroom. And the primary goal was not just for them to do the one study they worked with us on, but really that they would take what they learned from being part of this program and then be able to apply it to future research that they might want to do in their classrooms or in education spaces beyond the program. So that's kind of the broad background. I know we'll get into some of the more details later. And again, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions for things that people want to know more about.
Yes, I see that there are people commenting in the chat. If you want to ask questions, just type in the chat, then we will read your question later. But now the second question we have is that DEARS has now had 6 editions, and you've been one of the organizers, as you have already mentioned. How did the idea of DEARS emerge, and who are the people involved in bringing it to life? If there were any other people besides the ones you mentioned.
Yes, so I've kind of gave a little background on kind of how it started and where the idea came from. I'll flesh that out a little bit more. So the three of us, Dr. Heckman, Dr. Sheriff, and I, as we met and discussed and looked across the literature and actually did some literature reviews ourselves, trying to analyze what was happening in the computer science education literature. So the goal was not to say whether things were good or bad, but what we really did is we did a literature review of recently published studies on computer science education, looking at those papers through kind of a lens that we would look at empirical research in software engineering, for example, to try to look at, are people in their papers doing a good job of reporting all the things that we would like to know, like research questions and study design methods and data analysis methods and things like this. And what we found as we looked across those papers was not necessarily that people were doing bad research, but that what they were reporting in the papers was not as useful to someone who might want to either do a meta-analysis or maybe even replicate the study. We'll talk more about that later. But what we found was that the papers didn't necessarily contain all the information we would have liked to have seen as a reader. And so it's quite possible that the people doing the research had all that information and just didn't put it in the papers. And it's also possible that people were in this group of people that I mentioned before and just not maybe even realizing exactly what kind of information needed to be gathered. So this was kind of what was behind the emerging of the ideas, that we realized that there was really a need for this kind of training, and beyond just the training, because the material is out there, but the idea of DEARS was more than just a week-long training. It's also a mentoring. It's an ongoing process, and we'll get into more of those details later. But the three of us were the primary organizers behind it. We were able to obtain funding from the United States National Science Foundation to support the project. So what that meant was that the people who participated, so over the course of the 6 years, we had a number of people, kind of probably eight to 10, maybe slightly more in certain years, participate in the program. And so over the course of that time, there was no cost to the participants. So we brought them together. They were able to attend the boot camp. We covered that travel and all that as part of the grant that we got from the National Science Foundation. So beyond the three of us kind of organizing and doing the work, we had the funding from the National Science Foundation, and then we had some other graduate students that work with us along the way to do some more of the administrative and organizing and those kind of things. So that was kind of the team that was involved and how the idea came to start at the beginning.
Perfect. And then you conducted a systematic mapping of empirical studies in computing education research and obtained a broader picture of the methodological rigor in the field. It was basically what you mentioned before, but in what ways did those findings motivate the creation of DEARS?
Yeah, so kind of as I started to mention before, so as we went through those papers, what we did in our literature review, which is published and available online if people want to look at it, we developed a rubric that basically said if I was coming to a paper and I wanted to either understand exactly what happened in the study, or if I wanted to potentially repeat that study in my own classroom, because one of the things that we know about studying people is that one study over one group of people doesn't give you the final answer to whether something works or not, because every classroom is different, every university is different. Something that may work here in the US may not work in Brazil, for example, because the situations are different. So we know that in order to try something out in your own classroom, you need to be able to kind of understand what happened in the previous study. And so what we found as we developed our rubric is we said, okay, if we were going to try to repeat these kind of studies in our own situations, what is the information we would like to know? And that's some of the things I mentioned before, but we would like to know, what exactly are the research questions? Because sometimes it's hard to understand the results without knowing exactly what someone was trying to ask. So what are the research questions? What motivated them? What kind of data did the researchers collect, and how was that related to the research questions? What sort of analyses did they do? Where were their conclusions? How did those map back to the questions in the data? So we developed this rubric where we went through papers from both the ICSE technical symposium, as well as a couple of other slightly more research focused education conferences, and then a couple of journals. And so we went through a number of papers from all of these venues, applying our rubric to each one. And this is where the graduate students helped out a lot, because this was a fair amount of work to go through all these papers. But we went through and we applied the rubric to try to understand how common were we seeing all of these different aspects in papers. And then we were able to pull out and help motivate what we did in our training. So for example, one of the things that was not present very often at all in the papers was a section on threats to validity, which is really common and really important in empirical software engineering and other empirical research, but it just was not present as often in these papers. And there were other things, some were stronger, some were less present over time. And so that was the systematic mapping was really focused on doing that and trying to get this picture of what were people putting in their papers now, and how did that match up with what kind of the research and the standards say that you need to provide when you're describing empirical studies, especially if you want somebody to replicate them. So that all went into both the design of the content for our boot camp, which we'll talk about maybe in the next question a little bit more about specifically what happened in the boot camp. But it went into both the content, but also the way that we interact with the participants, both before and during and after the workshop.
Exactly. So DEARS is intentionally designed as a year-long journey. So there is an initial intensive workshop that you mentioned that the funding allowed you to bring people to your location, and then continued mentoring and a closing follow-up session. What role does each stage play in supporting participants as they move from an initial idea to a well-designed empirical study?
Yes. So as I mentioned a minute ago, the focus of DEARS was not just this week-long workshop. So that was kind of the most time-intensive part of the process, but it was not the only thing. So the way that the DEARS process worked is first what we did is we had people who were interested. We put out a call. We had people apply, and so the three of us went through the applications. We looked for, what people were interested in, what they wanted to learn from this experience. We tried to make sure that matched up with what we were planning to offer. And then we also looked at when people applied, we had them provide an initial idea of what they would like to study. What was their very high level initial research question. What is the topic that they were interested in doing as part of the DEERS project? And we also reviewed those topics to try to look for either some clusters of people doing similar things, or at least ones that one of the three of us thought we had enough experience and knowledge and were able to mentor. And so that was kind of the application process. So then we chose a subset of those applicants to be part of the DEERS cohort. And so the first stage in the DEERS cohort, other than just kind of some initial planning and all that, was the week-long summer workshop that we would do. And during that workshop, it was a mix of training material as well as hands-on. And so what we did the goal for each participant was they came to the workshop with an idea of what they thought they would like to study. The goal was to leave by the end of the workshop with at least a very well-defined set of research questions and an initial study design, if not a complete study design. So the hope was, again, because a lot of the people participating in this program were focused on teaching in their institutions, they often didn't have a lot of additional time to devote to research. So the goal was to try to help prepare as much as possible during the summer so that when they went back for the beginning of their semester, they had a lot of that already done and were not trying to do it while they were doing all their other teaching responsibilities. So during that week-long workshop, what we did is we would provide lectures on a topic, the theoretical material, for example, on research questions and what is a research question and how do you define a good research question? What are the aspects of that? What's a bad research question? What makes it bad? Things like that. And we would do that for all the different topics. So research questions, study design methods, data collection methods, quantitative and qualitative data analysis. And then after each teaching session, what we would do is we would have our participants at tables in the room, and each table would have at least one of the organizers at that table. And we would do the lecture, for example, on research questions. And then the participants would sit around their table with other participants and one of the organizers, and each person would, they would do some individual work first to kind of adapt their initial research question based on what they just heard. Then they would share it with the table. And the table would then spend time giving them feedback on their research question, both the other participants as well as the organizers. And so the goal was then to get more eyes on the question, and so that it would then kind of iterate and refine. And so over the course of the workshop, as we went through each theoretical section of the lectures, then the participants would refine their plan. There was some homework each night thing for them to read, or something that they were supposed to go back to over the evening and try to do some more work and come back the next day. So we tried to have a really good mix of lecture followed by hands-on, followed by some time where they could do some individual work. So that was the intensive portion of the in-person workshop, which again, like I said, the goal was to leave that with a fairly well-designed study, or at least a good progress on that. And then from that workshop through the next year, one of the three organizers would mentor each participant. And so what that would mean would we would meet with them over Zoom regularly, and whatever regularly meant to that participant. It could be monthly, it could be weekly, it just kind of depended on what stage they were in the process. And we provided ongoing mentoring after the workshop. Because a lot of times you'll leave the workshop, everything sounds great, and then you get back and you start trying to do it, and it doesn't make as much sense as it did when you were sitting there in person. And so we wanted to be a resource to kind of talk through what the process was, where they were they having trouble getting any sort of approvals, were they having trouble scheduling things, all of this. We worked through that with them, and even to the point once they had the data, helping them with analysis and those kind of things. And so that was after the workshop, that was a one-on-one interaction between one of the organizers and each participant. And then the end of the experience culminated with a workshop, a half day or a couple hour workshop at the next year's ICSE technical symposium, which most of the participants already attended. We provided a little bit of funding for them to come a day earlier for this workshop. And we would do kind of a a follow-up to what we had done in the summer. We would go around the group with all those who were there. Everybody would kind of give an update on what they had done. And then we'd spend some time as a group talking about, many of them at that point were getting into the data analysis phase. And so there were more questions about data analysis and things like that. So we would spend time talking about that. And it was really just a chance for the group to kind of get back together and reflect on what had happened. And in many cases, people had run their studies and had data. In other cases, things had happened over the course of the year and they had not yet completed the study. And so we were able to get updates and things like that. So that was the kind of the overall process, and the ultimate goal, which happened with many of the studies, but not all of them for various reasons, was that the participants in the end would be able to publish either a paper at the ICSE Technical Symposium or some other education venue reporting on what they had done over the course of their DEERS year cohort. So that's kind of the overall process of what we did for the year with these participants.
Okay, so even though there are excellent methodological resources available in textbooks, DEERS deliberately foregrounds research design decisions and their underlying rationales. How do you think this kind of guided, community-based exploration of research design is particularly important for computing education research?
Yes, so that whole process that I just kind of described for the year-long process was really very much motivated by what you just asked, because yes, the material is available. I mean, you can go do a search and ask, what's a good research question, and you can read the theoretical material that will tell you what's a good research question, or read some things about survey design, or gathering automated data from a tool that you're using in your class. You can go read all the theoretical literature about how to do those things. But what we found to be really useful in our process was all of those things may make perfect sense as you read them, but then when you go to apply them, especially if it's not something that you're used to doing. And again, we intentionally focused on participants who were wanting to move into doing CS education or computing education research, who did not have a strong background in doing human-based research. And so the real benefit to bring them together, which is true with any kind of research, but especially when you're dealing with people, is if I design my own study, I kind of have blinders on to the things that I think are great. And it's really helpful to have other people sit around the table and go, well, did you think about this? Or is it really feasible to answer that question? Maybe you want to refine that. Or here's another question. Or you're designing this, you're thinking about designing the study this way. Do you think you're actually going to be able to get that data? Or do you think that data will measure the thing that you think it's measuring? And so doing study design, especially human-based study design, and especially in computing education research with a group of people who this is a new activity, doing this in a community is much more effective than trying to do it by yourself. And many of the people that we brought to the workshop, if not all of them, but most of them, likely did not have this kind of community back in their home institution. So maybe they were the only one there that was really interested in doing this kind of research. They didn't have other people that they could talk with as they iterated on their design. So the real benefit both of the in-person workshop, which got feedback from a large group of people, and then the ongoing one-on-one mentoring, was just to kind of be that sounding board to see an aspect of the problem, or to see an aspect of the study that either the participant either hadn't thought about, or maybe was a potential problem that they just hadn't seen because they were looking at it from a different perspective. And so bringing this community together actually gave a lot more iteration. And again, we saw it every year. We looked at what people came in with to what they ended up with, even after just 3 or 4 days. And you could see some significant change and significantly better study designs, somewhat from the feedback from the organizers, but also a lot just from getting feedback from their fellow participants, because they had lots of experiences in different ways. And so getting more perspectives like that is really a useful thing. Again, especially in computing education research, when you're dealing with such varied questions, varied types of students, varied types of institutions, all these different variables that you can't control, but may be very relevant to how you're trying to measure and study things. So that's kind of what I think is the general benefit that we got from bringing all the group together, as opposed to and we did record our lectures and the videos are out there, but even just watching the videos is not as useful as participating in a cohort experience.
Okay, I see the DEARS website is on the chat, also on our screen. So the next question is, looking ahead, one of the goals of DEARS is to support participants in design studies that can be replicated across contexts. Why is it important for researchers to think about replication from the very beginning when making design decisions?
Yes, so one of our kind of driving questions at the beginning, and I've kind of mentioned this a few times as we've talked, was, can somebody read your report of your study and then replicate it? Because that's one of the key hallmarks of science, is that you can replicate a result. And again, as I said earlier, we know when the focus of a study is people, that replicating a result is even more challenging, because I could run the same study in my classroom here in Alabama, and you could run a study in Brazil and get very different answers because the students are different. And so it's, especially when you're dealing with these situations, it's really important to be able to repeat and replicate a study, and then either look at similarities or look at differences, right? If you see a similar result, you have more confidence that whatever you observed is probably a reality because we've seen it in different situations. Or if you see a difference, then that gives you the insight to be able to say, okay, why did we get a different answer in this classroom versus that? What were different about the two situations? And that even introduces some new research questions to be able to study, okay, did that difference, did it actually impact the study? Is it an important factor? And so thinking about replication from the beginning helps you design your study and even more report your study in a way that other people will be able to pick up and replicate. Because as I mentioned before, kind of if you're not providing the right type of information in your paper or in whatever your research report is, then somebody who wants to replicate your study will not be able to replicate it. They won't have all the materials that you have, and maybe they get a different result. And it could be that they found an interesting finding, or it could be just that they did the study differently, and that's why the result was different. So thinking about replication from the beginning is really important so that you can set up the environment so someone can replicate it. And again, that was one of the original driving factors. We didn't get into replication in DEARS. We were trying to prepare things so that before studies can be replicated, we need reports that provide all the right information to allow it to be replicated. And that was the goal of our first literature review, was to see, was that actually happening or not? And so again, as we found, it wasn't happening to the level that we thought would be necessary for people to repeat things. And so that motivated the DEARS project. And then the DEARS project has now ended, but we have a follow-on project that's just started, which is focused on replication. And so what we are just beginning this, so I can't report any results yet, but it is building very much on what we found in DEARS. And what we're doing in this new project, as opposed to bringing in a cohort of people that all want to do their own study and mentoring them through that, we are in the process of identifying a topic, and we're going to bring together a small team that we're going to call the replication design team. And that group is going to design a joint distributed replication on a topic where we will identify a number of variables and factors that we want to change. So maybe we want to run things in small schools and large schools. Maybe we want to run things, in different kinds of classes. So we'll look across whatever the topic is that we're studying. For example, the first one, we're leaning towards studying something around how people create teams within computer science courses. So at least most software engineering courses, a lot of other ones have team projects. And so we're going to be doing a large scale study on teams, and we haven't designed it yet, but in the design process, we'll be identifying what are the different factors that we want to study. And then we'll actually put out a call to the community to say, all right, we have a study design already laid out and created with the specific axes where you might vary things. and we'll put out a call for people who would like to actually run that study in their own classroom. And we'll be looking for specific variations on different factors so that when we get done, let's say we have the same study run in 10 or 15 classrooms, we can put all that data back together and say, okay, we know these universities look like this, these look like this, here's a specific difference. Do we see a difference in the results, and whatever the other variables are that we define? So a lot of times replications, when they are done, are a little bit unplanned. It's somebody sees a study, they think it's interesting, and they want to replicate it, and that's very useful. But what we're trying to do with this new project is make it systematic and planned so that when we get to the end, we will be able to give some overall insight into what's happening on the topic. So just kind of wrapping back to DEERS, that since the goal of DEERS was to help people be able to do studies in a way that were replicable, that kind of helped motivate why we're going in the direction that we're going now.
Yes, we have questions from the audience. So the first question is in two parts. So I'm going to show the first part. Maria Lydia Fioravanti wrote, many students are eager to conduct meaningful empirical studies, but often feel overwhelmed by methodological choices and limited research experience. So based on your work with DEERS and your supervision of graduate students, what concrete advice would you give to students who want to design high quality empirical education studies?
Thank you for that question. So I guess I'll say a few things. So the first thing I will say is reading the reports of other studies is always a good way. And it doesn't mean that they're always good, but reading other studies helps you see what people are studying, how they're doing it. Sometimes you will see things that make a lot of sense to you, and it sounds like a very good way to do things. Other times you'll read a paper and you will realize that that was not the best way to do something. So reading other people's work is always very useful. And then I think the other thing that I would tell the grad students, and I tell my own students, and then it's even what I just said about the cohort, is trying to do these things on your own is really challenging, especially if it's something that you're new to doing, because there are a large number of empirical methods. All of them have strengths and weaknesses. There's no perfect study design. And so the whole process of designing a study, which is a lot of what we went through in the workshop, is saying, okay, there are a number of different ways I can do this study. There's a number of different types of data I can collect. If I do this one, it has these strengths and these weaknesses. If I do this one, it has a different set of strengths and a different set of weaknesses. Which one of those is more preferable to me? Which set of weaknesses is less problematic in my situation? And then again, there's no perfect answer, and that's why having input from other people. So if you have a supervisor that is, that knows how to do empirical research, that's a great resource. If not, then look around at people that are publishing papers and follow up with them, contact them. A lot of faculty members are more than happy to give some input and advice, especially if it's something that they're interested in. So I think the worst thing you could do is just try to do it all by yourself, because I've designed many studies. I still find it very valuable to talk to people and get input on what's happening. That's the reason for this replication project. We're going to bring a group of 4 or 5 people together to design the study, because even the 3 of us as organizers say we don't have all the answers. We need all these other perspectives. So I think those are the things I would say. So just to recap, reading things that are published, and then finding people that you can talk with about your ideas to get feedback on, whether that's a supervisor, whether that's other people in the community that or even just trying to contact people who are publishing the papers that you're reading.
Thanks. So the next question is by Johan Duarte. Adolfo mentioned the importance of DEERS for replication. Should DEERS be considered even when thinking on replicating via AI?
So I'm not sure exactly what the question is asking. So I don't know if you can explain a little bit more what you mean by replicating via AI.
Yes, I was not sure either. So I'm going to ask a question which is kind of related. And let's wait for Johan to clarify his question. But my question is more related to the kind of AI hype that we see people adopting. Oh, everything is going to change in computer science, and AI is going to change everything in teaching, computing. So, of course, maybe part of it is true, but is there something in your study that in years or in your next project, current project, that is can help people that want to study how AI is going to affect computing education?
So yes, I mean, I think definitely. And when we were deciding on the first study for our new project, we did the three of us did have a discussion on whether that first study should be something related to AI. We chose. We're going to do at least 2 studies as part of this project, so it's likely we may do something on AI the second time because we kind of wanted to let things settle a little bit. But yes, I think, looking at, and there's been a number of studies already done in different ways around this, but looking at how, for example, students are using AI, studying the effects of it, if you let students use some sort of LLM or generator to write code for intro projects, what impact does that have on their learning? And so that's a very general but important question, but you could design a study in 100 different ways to look at that question, by what you mean by impact, what you mean by learning, all of these different things. So I think the methods that we did in DEERS, none of them, I mean, those were all done before AI really kind of became a thing that was useful in classrooms. So none of those studies really dealt with AI specifically, but there's nothing in the methods that would prevent you from using them to do a study about the use of AI in whatever aspect of education you cared about.
And while we wait for Johan to clarify, the next question I have is about replication of DEERS. Do you know of any replication of DEERS, the initiative, in other countries, other environments?
I do not know of any. I have not heard from anyone that's replicating it. Part of our goal in writing the paper about it was to explain what we did. I don't think anything that we did is something that could not be replicated by other people that had the resources and the time and the background in doing education research. So there's, again, it's covering the theoretical material, it's bringing a group of people together, it's giving them a space to iterate and plan their study, and then following up with them. So it is something that we would be very happy if someone would replicate in other places, but at this point I don't know of anyone that has.
Perfect. And you have had 6 editions, and because of COVID, the pandemic, 4 editions of the summer workshop were in person and 2 were virtual, right?
Correct.
And did you feel any difference? I mean, was virtual significantly worse?
So I can only give you my impression, because we didn't really collect or there wasn't really a way to collect data that would answer exactly that question. But my perspective from being part of both of them was that the in-person was better, because you get, again, you can replicate some of the infrastructure where you do the lecture and you put people in breakout rooms to talk and do those kind of things. But what you can't replicate is during the work time, somebody looking over at somebody else and asking a question, or during the lunch time, or during the time when people are just on a break and we're walking around seeing the campus. We did this at University of Virginia, so we always took a nice walk around the campus to see all the nice scenery and all that. Just some of the things of just the interactions that are unplanned, those you really cannot duplicate in an online setting. But the program itself, I mean, you could. Again, we would do the lectures virtually, and then we would do the the meetings and the table discussions in Zoom rooms, which to some degree works, to some degree. Sometimes it's nice to just be able to put a piece of paper down on the table and draw some things, or go up to a whiteboard and draw some things. Some of that's much more difficult to do in a virtual environment. So we made it work. The people that participated got a good experience, but I do think the ones that were in person provided a better experience for the participants.
Yes, and University of Virginia has one of the most beautiful university campus all over the world. It's very beautiful.
Yes, that's why we chose Dr. Sheriff is at University of Virginia, and he was kind enough to host. I think the first year we did not do it there, but all the rest of the years we did it there, and it worked out very well. So we kept going back there because it was a nice campus.
Okay, I'm going to read again Johan's question and then his later comments. So Adolfo mentioned the importance of DEERs for replication. Should DEERs be considered even when thinking on replicating via AI? And by AI, I mean training or using outputs to train autonomous agents. And I asked him, what's AI? Is an AI application? And he explained, I mean, DEERs is useful for helping proceeding on study application. By AI application, I meant similarly use DEERs to replicate the study steps within AI, as it seems that DEERs help on understanding and structure research questions. I thought it was helpful for the AI integration, since structure usually helps its efficiency.
So I'm trying to think how best to answer this. I'm still not 100% sure I understand the question, but I think, so I'll answer it a couple ways, and if that doesn't answer the question, then please clarify it. So I think, I mean, in some sense, again, we did these workshops primarily before the AI tools were at the stage they are now. So if we were to do this again, in the DEERs format, I think we would definitely have to include the use of AI in the planning more than we did. Now, what that would mean, I don't know, because we haven't done it. It might mean getting some initial feedback on research questions from AI and then using that as input to discuss. I still don't think it would replace the discussion of the group of people in the room. But yes, it could definitely provide some useful input. So that's one piece of it. The other part about using the outputs to train autonomous agents, I'm not sure I understand kind of what exactly you're asking there, and what output you're talking about in terms of outputs of studies. And so if you want to explain that more, I'm happy to try to answer, but I don't really know that I understand exactly what you're asking there.
Yes, I'm also not sure. Maybe because I know that some people train some AI agents to simulate people, and then they do research with those simulated people, but I'm not sure if that's what Johan means.
We didn't look at that, and I'm not sure that's not on the plan for us to look at, but that could be something interesting, but it's just not something we've looked at.
And another question that I have is regarding, because you mentioned that this was a program mostly for teaching professors, right? And
yes.
They usually are not required to do research, as far as I know. But what's the usual teaching professor loads in terms of classes? Does that person has time to do research?
Right. And that's a really good question. And that does vary somewhat depending on the institution. So again, here in the US, and I'm not sure how it is in other parts of the world, but here in the US, we have primarily, we have two kinds of institutions. And again, there's a range, but we have some institutions which really the focus is on education. There's very, very little academic research because the goal is to just educate the students. That's the goal. And so the people in those universities really have no education or no publication research focus at all. And in those situations, people are probably teaching 3 and 4 classes a semester. It just depends on exactly the university. And then we also have universities that are more research universities. And in those universities, we tend to have people that are in a teaching track role. So they're in a research environment because the tenure track and the tenured faculty are doing research and teaching. The teaching track faculty are doing much more teaching because, again, that's their focus. And again, they may also be in the 3 to 4 courses a semester range, but it depends on their institution. For example, if their institution, and there are a number of these, are supportive of computer science education research, they may give the faculty member who's interested in doing that research some release from their course time to be able to do that research if the department finds it useful. And like I said, even getting funding for those from research agencies, because both Dr. Heckman and Dr. Sheriff that work with me on this are teaching track faculty, but they were part of this grant. So they were able to get funding to do this work and then also get some time to do it. So it varies a lot depending on the institution. But yes, that was one of the challenges that we wanted to address with this DEERS cohort was the time, because we knew that if somebody was left to their own and said, "Hey, I want to run this study," but if they're teaching 4 classes in the semester, you're barely able to just keep up with what you need to do for the classes and really have no time to do the research. So that was the goal of bringing them together, to try to do as much planning beforehand, and then having the regular meetings with the mentor. Even if you didn't do a lot of work in those meetings, what we found is it was very useful for people to say, "I know every couple of weeks I'm going to talk to you," and it kind of forces me to keep moving forward, even slowly. Otherwise, it would fall behind all the other priorities. And so, just having some of that tried to help people. And again, these were all people that wanted to do this, and so it was an interest of theirs, and so it kind of gave them the motivation to push it ahead of some other things maybe. But yes, the time was always a challenge, and we definitely had a few of our participants who had great ideas, great plans, and then they went back to their university in the semester, and either they were assigned an administrative duty that took away all the time they could have done, or they were assigned an extra course and things just fell apart and they weren't actually able to run the study. So that was always a risk, but we did have many that succeeded.
Okay, we have a few comments by Johan. I believe he first said thanks for the answer, and then he wrote, "Adolfo got it also by using autonomous agents for conducting studies automatically. I thought DEERS would help that by better structuring the study." So I believe that's the idea of simulated people, not quite exactly what DEERS is about.
Right. But even using the methods, you could design a study if you know that's your context. You would still have some of the same design considerations. It would just be focused on these autonomous agents as opposed to people. And some of the methods may be a little bit different, but the process that we used of discussing and iterating and all that would still be very useful.
And he finally said, "Thank you both." So, Lilian, we don't have any further questions from the audience. Do you have anything you want to ask or compliment?
Okay, no, I think we are good, and we can proceed to the closing of this talk. So those were really great insights. This initiative has already been supporting computing educations in strengthening their research practices, and we believe it has even greater potential to support graduate students as they begin designing their own research projects. DEERS has been a foundational inspiration for the school. The emphasis on thoughtful research design, on discussing methodological decisions openly, and on building supportive research community is something we are actively trying to cultivate here as well. Professor Carver, thank you once again for your generosity, your insights, and for sharing your experience with us. This conversation has been truly inspiring and deeply aligned with the spirit of our school. I would like to extend my deepest thanks to Adolfo for this collaboration. His dedication to science and communication in software engineering has been instrumental in strengthening our community and in amplifying initiatives like this one. And to everyone who is joining us, we invite you to continue with us tomorrow for our next interview with Professor Travassos, who will be discussing the evolution of empirical software engineering as a field. Thank you all for being here. That concludes our session. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.